Hey guys, welcome to my February wrap-up video where I talk about the books I read in the month of February. Obviously, it was only 4 books, not a lot of reading, but they were pretty heavy. There were a couple of big books, a couple of big boys, heavy lifting here. So I really loved my February lineup. In January, I think I read 7 books, so only 4 in February, but like I said, I enjoyed every single one of them. They were very different. One of them was a fantasy book, and we're gonna start with that one. And the other 3 were, of course, science fiction. That's why I'm here. I read a lot of science fiction now. Each sci-fi book was completely different also, which was great. Each one had a different feel to it, different trope, different author, of course, and I learned different things from each book. So it's an exciting month of reading for me, February, and it's been a little over a month now that I've been on booktube. And also I think it makes sense to maybe say a word or two about my experience before I get into the books. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all the positive feedback I've gotten from so many people on YouTube regarding my videos, and I've connected with a few people, and I've enjoyed watching others talk about books, and I think I became a better reader because of booktube, because I'm just more mindful, more careful about what I'm reading. I'm thinking a little bit more as I'm reading. So I'm not only am I enjoying the reading experience the way I've always done, but I am actively participating in the reading experience. So while I love to get lost in a book, and I still do now, as I'm lost in a book, I'm taking notes also. I'm thinking about what I'm reading. I'm looking for the context. I'm thinking of my own experiences and how they inform my understanding of what I'm reading. Because I think everyone gets something different from a book because of what we bring to the reading experience. But I am definitely more mindful, and that's all thanks to booktube. So it's been great, right? I mean, and I'm surprised by how many people have watched my videos. I know it doesn't compare with most booktubers. There's so many great people who are so intelligent in the way they can talk about the books they're reading, and I'm just happy to be here to talk about the books that I've enjoyed. So anyway, I'm gonna take a sip of my kombucha. I don't know if you guys drink kombucha, but you should. Rowdy Mermaid. This one has pineapple, turmeric, and lion's mane, and it's caffeine free, so that's a bonus as well. No caffeine in Rowdy Mermaid. This is a local product from Boulder, Colorado. This is my favorite kombucha. Yeah, it makes me feel good. All the gut bacteria, and this is like foreshadowing about one of the books that I read in February. Kombucha is definitely foreshadowing. I just realized that. That's pretty interesting. But we're not going to start with that book. Let's start with the biggest one of them all. The biggest one of them all. Well over 1,000 pages. Brandon Sanderson, Words of Radiance. What a book. What a book. Great book. I think most of you have heard of Brandon Sanderson and his fantasy epic Stormlight Archive, 4 books in. It's going to be a 10-book series broken into 2 5-book arcs. That's my understanding of this series. I've only read the first 2 so far. In January, I finished the first one, The Way of Kings, and I loved it. It blew my mind. It was incredible. It was so much fun, so fast-paced. I love the characters, so I had to read Words of Radiance right away, pretty much. So February, I started reading this. And I think I wish, actually, that I took maybe a month off, at least a month off. I didn't, however, and I still loved the book. But there was a little bit of mental fatigue after reading, 1,000-page Way of the Kings. And then this one was a little tired towards the end of the book. But still, it's a great read. May not be as good, in my opinion, as The Way of Kings, but that's probably because The Way of Kings was my introduction into the Cosmere. The Cosmere is the overarching universe in which Brandon Sanderson's books live, and that's also a unique and an amazing idea, and it's so smart. Brandon Sanderson is a genius. I've watched some of his lectures at Brigham Young, and yeah, he's definitely a smart guy, but the way he puts together the context for his books is just brilliant. The guy is incredible salesman, really, and on top of the fact that he can write. he can write, he can tell a story. So yeah, I'm loving the series, the not easy to say, Stormlight Archive. I'm really loving it. It's my first introduction to Brandon Sanderson, which most people will tell you this is not the way to do it. There are some other books a little easier, smaller reads that are probably better ways to get introduced to Brandon Sanderson's work. For example, the Mistborn series is a good way to do that, to jump onto Brandon Sanderson's bandwagon. Perhaps The Warbreaker is another one that's often recommended. So, and I think that probably makes sense, even though my experience has been great with this series. I'm loving it, and I'm a fan already, and I'm gonna be reading. I already have Mistborn, the first book. I can't find a good copy of Warbreaker. All I see is that small paperback, mass market. I want it to look good on the shelf. So yeah, I'm still looking for that. But yeah, great books. The character work in these books is incredible. I mean, obviously the main characters here, the main POVs are really well developed. But what has surprised me tremendously is how incredible some of the side characters are. I mean, the whole crew of Bridge 4 is just like incredible. Everyone is unique. They're in the big scope of things, they're minor characters, but I mean the time that Brandon Sanderson put into developing them is really impressive. The language is simple, so it's a fast read. The world building, however, is what slows things down a little bit because it's massive. This is high fantasy, which means we're talking about magical things. We're talking about things that are clearly impossible in our realm, but it takes place elsewhere. So it's high magic. It doesn't take place on Earth. Yeah, I'm loving the series. I'm loving the fantasy of Brandon Sanderson. It is tremendous. It's well written, and it does deal with some things that I think perhaps most authors, when they're writing fantasy, would omit. I mean, there is some darkness underneath most of the characters. There are shades of gray for sure. It's not just black and white. The nuance is there for sure. There are things about depression. I mean, Brandon Sanderson is not afraid to tackle some big issues. Some characters are, you can question their motives, like Shallan. I don't know really if she's good or bad. There's some really interesting characters. I think he writes women beautifully. Jasna, for example. Yes, it's Jasna. By the way, just so you know, Jasna comes from a Polish word. Jasna means bright in Polish. So it's not Jasna. I know some people say Jasna. It should be Jasna, in my opinion. I don't even care what Brandon Sanderson says. I'm gonna make sure it's Jasna, and I'll let everybody know. Jasna means bright. Jasna means someone who is bright. So anyway, so yes, Jasna. Anyway, great book. If you haven't read Brandon Sanderson, if you like fantasy at all, I think you'll enjoy it. I don't know a whole lot about fantasy. Tolkien, yes, The Hobbit, I loved, of course. But I'm not an expert, but I did enjoy these books, and I'm looking forward to reading the next two books, The Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, but I am gonna take a month or maybe a couple of months, maybe a few months off to let this kind of settle down. So now, what should I talk about? Let's talk about the next book that I read, I think in chronological order. And here is where kombucha comes in, right? I mean, we've got cultures here, and this book, Blood Music by Greg Bear, is a fabulous read. This book is freaking dark. This was a surprise to me. It was fun. It was fast-paced because this is a much shorter book. I mean, 250 pages or so. So you can get through this in a couple of days. And it's a fun read. It's science fiction. We're talking about fictional science being introduced in this book. That's really what makes this sci-fi in the beginning, right? We have a protagonist who develops this bacterium that is able to think for itself. It becomes intelligent, highly intelligent, and he's doing this on the side in a lab where he works. And when I guess the people in charge of the lab find out about it, they tell no, shut it down, destroy all the samples, and you're fired. What does he decide to do? He decides, well, these are his babies. He can't kill his babies. You don't do that. So without thinking much, he ingests his babies. And this is where things start. Yeah, the effects are incredible. At first, they seem possibly positive, and this is also interesting how the book takes turns. There's a certain flow to the book that is very unpredictable, and I had no clue where this book is gonna go, how it's gonna end up, what's gonna happen to the protagonist, and then ultimately the stakes are really high. What's gonna happen to the world? And Yeah, it's dark, it's gory at times. It's almost a horror sci-fi kind of a gender bender of sorts. And Yeah, I mean, these small organisms are wreaking havoc on Earth, and this book is interesting, and just the idea of having billions of intelligent beings inside a person, where the protagonist, kind of becomes like a universe unto himself, was just incredible. So I really like this book. Not my favorite read of February, definitely, but it was great. It was awesome. Like I said, every single book here was fantastic, and yeah, I highly recommend. Let me know if you've read Blood Music by Greg Bear at all. Or if you've read some of his other books, maybe some of his other works, let me know as well if I should, what is the next one I should read by him. This is the first and so far the only book that I read by Mr. Bear. So yeah, I'm looking forward to finding out. Same thing with Brandon Sanderson. I'm curious your thoughts on Words of Radiance, and what do you recommend? Because I was actually thinking that maybe before I actually get into Oathbringer, I should read something else in the Cosmere, and I don't know, maybe I should read. I have Mistborn, which I picked it up for my daughter. I think that book, from what I've heard, straddles the line between adult fantasy and young adult fantasy. My daughter's 14, so I'd love for her to read that one, because I think she'll enjoy Brandon Sanderson's writing very much. But I think perhaps Stormlight Archive is a little too much for her to jump into right away. But maybe I should read Mistborn, or maybe I should just pick up whatever copy I can right now of Warbreaker. So let me know if you're a big fan of Brendan's and you've read quite a few of his books. Let me know what I should do next. Should I go into Oathbringer, or should I just suspend Stormlight and read some other stuff first? Might be an interesting way of doing it. So we'll see. I'm curious. Let me know. Now, the next book, Left Hand of Darkness, what can I say? This was a mind-bending experience for me. An incredible book, smart book, a book that teaches you a lot about, oh my God, about so many things. I mean, it's a book that deals with gender. It's a book that deals with friendship. It's a book that is really an important reading experience for me. I think at a certain age, a book like this really hits home and makes you think of ideas that you haven't contemplated before. And I'll put a link here somewhere to a review that I did for this book already. If you missed it, please check it out. It's not long, and I think it's a pretty good review. And it's just a fantastic book. So I'm not gonna get into too much of the book, because I have the full review. But I love this. This is such an important book, and it's one of those books that you read, you finish reading it, and then you're like, I should just start reading it again, because I know I'm gonna reread it anyway at some point. So it's probably not gonna be right away, of course, because I have such a huge lineup of books. But if I didn't, I would be reading this again, because I know I missed so much of the nuance in this book, and the pacing of this book is incredible, and the story is just beautifully told, yeah, it's just perfect. The length of it, everything is perfect, and Ursula K. Le Guin is just a great writer, and this really informs you a lot about her politics and her view of the world. She was clearly someone who had strong political views, but anarchy, leftist, strong vibes, which I enjoy and sympathize with. But also, it's not heavy-handed. You can feel it, you can sense it, you know it's there, but it is nuanced also. Yeah, I think anyone would enjoy this book. And this is probably the best example of a book that, depending on what you bring to the reading experience, you may get something else out of. So that is something that that this book, as opposed to maybe like Stormlight Archive, which is a little bit of a lighter overall read, this book really requires a slow, thoughtful reading. So yeah, I love this. This is like, should be up on a pedestal. Great book. I really loved it. It's probably the best book I read in February overall, as far as how it's gonna stay with me and how it's changing some of the ways I've thought about the world. And the last but definitely not least, is this amazing Stephen King 11/22/63. This book was just incredible. I mean, I've read a lot of Stephen King. Prior to reading this book, if I was making a list of some of my favorite Stephen King books, I don't know if maybe I'll make that a whole list, but I would say The Stand is up there. It, of course. I mean, I remember reading it years ago, and I was reading it at night in bed, and I was so scared, and I needed to go to the bathroom, and I was afraid to get up, to get from under the covers. That's how scary it was. So I love that. That's Stephen King at his best. Misery. I love the story. What an incredible story. I love and the book and the film as well, of course. So Stand, It, Misery. Of course, The Shining. Oh my God, that maybe was my favorite book before I read this one. But after reading this, I think this may have to go right to the top, believe it or not. This was such an incredible book, and it was so much more than what I expected. So of course, I read this right now because it's got the heavy sci-fi vibes with time travel. Time travel is such an amazing science fiction trope, so much fun. So that was great. But it really, once you get into this book, into the meat of the book, the middle half of the book, the love story. The love story is really what captured me. This was the most incredible love story. I'm not a romantic in that sense. I don't really read books for love story. My wife loves to read, what's his name? Nicholas Sparks. Not my cup of coffee or tea, whatever. But in this case, oh my God, the love story here, I was rooting for them. Oh, it was just beautifully done. So it was incredible how this story had the science fiction side to it, high stakes. I mean, incredibly high stakes. Time travel and how your participation, the butterfly effect in events. What the effects of those will be on the future world. That was super interesting. It's well written. The characters are vivid as always. Stephen King can write a character and he can put you there. Reading rather about the 60s through the pen, through the mind of Stephen King. There's probably nothing like it, in my opinion. That's what I love the most about him, the characters, the people, the language. And in this case, the darkness is there, the darkness of Dallas in those days, the hatefulness, the racism. There are a lot of things here that Stephen King writes about. He points to little things like an outhouse for African Americans. There are things that you will read here that will make you uncomfortable also, which was interesting. JFK, that's amazing story. A lot of research went into writing this story, so it's also historically important. Feels like you're reading historical fiction, but it's science fiction at the same time. It's a romance, it's political. This book has it all, and on top of that, it's just a fun read, fast paced, just musical, just dance baby dance. It's quick. The book was just incredible. I was really blown away because this book really had several things beautifully kind of intertwined. And it really made, I think if I had to say it right now, of course it's fresh in my mind, this might be my favorite my favorite Stephen King book that I've ever read. I'm gonna have to think about that and do a proper ranking of all the books that I've read by Stephen King, and there's a lot. Pet Sematary, another one, of course. Gotta love Pet Sematary. So yeah, but this one is right on the top. I think top 5 for sure, no question. Definitely read this. If you like Stephen King and for some reason like myself, you haven't read this, come on, what the heck you doing? Pick it up, read it, you're gonna love it. There's no way that you're not gonna enjoy this book. So that's my February. Great month, fabulous month. And I have to say, March is off to a great start too, because catching up on a read that should have been done a long time ago. So this is, as you can see, Hyperion by Dan Simmons. And oh my God, I don't know what to say about this book, but this book has exceeded my expectations for sure. So yeah, I can't wait to talk about this book, but that's for another video. So anyway, I think that's it. Kombucha, good. February, great.